And finally, Nicola Sturgeon has announced that she's resigning as an MSP. Many people might not have been aware that she was still on. She hardly ever turned up in Parliament. She was also subjected to a protest at the weekend during International Women's Day. I mean, imagine the gall, Tom. Someone who has set out to destroy the rights of women in Scotland appearing in a day on behalf of for International Women's Day. It's clear that that issue, the trans issue, the gender issue, is going to be her legacy.
No, absolutely. I mean, that and the kind of grubby business which erupted with Police Scotland and the sort of Sturgeon sect within the SNP afterwards, which is a very difficult thing to talk about for legal reasons. But I think those two things together, the gender bill and all that came after it, and that will be what Nicola Sturgeon is remembered for. Fundamentally, this was supposed to be a politician whose main aim was to, again, give Scotland the right of self-determination, and yet she basically torched her entire premiership for the right of sex offenders to go into women's prisons.
Yeah.
It tells you something about where kind of left technocratic parties are at the moment, which is that even their supposed stated primary aims can be subordinated to the kind of elite hysterias of the day, particularly around identity politics and so on. And Nicola Sturgeon is a great example of that. I mean, she's torched her legacy over something which was never really supposed to be why she was in politics in the first place. Certainly not someone who always liked to position herself as a feminist, despite the fact she tried to completely eviscerate women's rights in Scotland.
And Rakib, probably one of my favourite quotes from Nicola Sturgeon was when she was talking about her critics, those who criticise the gender bill must be misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, of course, and possibly racist as well. Do you think that's a fair criticism of people who stand up for women's rights?
Oh, God, it was absolutely remarkable. I think that she's responsible for much of the radical transgenderism, which spiraled out of control in recent years. And I think her legacy is actually a very poor one. I think she's left the Scottish independence movement in fairly weak condition. I'm quite pleased about that because I'm a unionist. But I think that this idea that she has been a defender of women's rights, she's been the exact opposite, in my view. I think that a lot of the gender identitarian politics that she peddled, especially as leader of the SNP, it threatened women's rights. And she clearly didn't seem to understand those perfectly legitimate concerns when it came to sensitive female-only spaces such as rape crisis centres, domestic violence sanctuaries, women's prisons as well, especially with the Isla Bryson case. So I think that overall her political legacy is a very poor one. Tom's obviously talked about that grubby business. We won't get into that too much. But overall, I think that here was a politician who much of the mainstream liberal media thought she was a sensible politician. She was polished, a sophisticated politician. But I'll have to strongly disagree with them on that one.
And Tom, it feels like Nicola Sturgeon is a piece of a certain type of politician that they all seem to be on the way out. We've just had Justin Trudeau has left Canada. Jacinda Ardern has been gone for a while. That sort of woke, technocratic, but also authoritarian type.
Absolutely. I think the authoritarianism is one of the main through lines of a regime like Sturgeon's or Trudeau's or so on. These people who generally get presented as liberal, small L or large L, depending on the party that you're talking about, and yet have been fundamentally illiberal. I mean, the SNP is a great example of this. It's almost as soon as they get into power, despite presenting themselves as people who think Scots and their rights should be respected and that they should have self-determination and so on, didn't think that Scots should be trusted to raise their own children, that there should be this named person scheme. We had a state-approved guardian for every child in the country who, one of the first things they did when they got in power was to ban offensive football chants, who, of course, introduced this hate crime act, which criminalised even, dinner table conversations. The authoritarianism is very much deep, and I think as well as the idea that these people are in any sense kind of liberal doesn't make any sense, but also the idea that they're progressive when they're going around suggesting that women who complain about men invading their spaces, that campaigners, dogged campaigners for women's rights, are concerned about the presence of a double rapist in a women's prison. The fact that she was the politician who was saying these people are not only wrong, but they're malign, that they're hate-filled and whatever, just shows you what a topsy-turvy world we now live in, which is, again, putting the rapist in a women's prison is the respectable, progressive position to hold. It's crazy, but I'm always struck by how kind of carried away by these things people can be, even having, like in Nicola Sturgeon's case, only seeming to kind of become preoccupied with that issue not that long ago.
Yeah.